These are my responses for Lab 3.3 on biodiversity. Which of your habitats has the greatest biodiversity? Does this support your hypothesis? The tropical rainforest habitat has the greatest biodiversity. This habitat has a diversity index of 0.948, and we know that the closer the diversity index is to 1, the greater the biodiversity. This finding supports my hypothesis. I hypothesize that the habitat with the most species, so in this case the most different types of beans, and the most evenness, or the most equal distribution, would have the greatest biodiversity, and that was true for the rainforest habitat. Question number 2. Is an agricultural field truly a monoculture? Why or why not? For this I said it is and it isn't. As the background information stated, monocultures don't really exist in nature. Nature must be subdued with pesticides and other agricultural methods to keep a diversity of plant life at bay. But agricultural fields are an artificially created monoculture because typically only one crop is grown in a field at a time. Okay. What are some of the major causes for the loss and for the increase of biodiversity in a habitat? For loss, I think the biggest thing is just human influence on the habitat. So that could be human population growth, which could result in habitat destruction, pollution, and also agriculture, because as stated in the previous question, pesticides and other things are used to keep biodiversity at bay in agricultural fields. So all of those things can affect the biodiversity in a habitat by either destroying the habitat, like deforestation, or just making it less fit for certain species, which then can kind of create a chain reaction where if one species can no longer survive in that habitat, it will have some effect on another species. To increase biodiversity, so for this one, I was kind of thinking about how to increase biodiversity in like already developed communities, like in neighborhoods, because I found this really interesting publication about that. So I think for that, as a way to increase biodiversity in your own neighborhood, it could be things like reducing the use of pesticides and fertilizers on your lawn, because we know that those things kill insects and kill different plants. So by removing the use of those, you allow for more biodiversity in your lawn. And I also saw something interesting about providing habitats for birds and squirrels and chipmunks and things in your yard, which can easily be done by putting in bird houses or even building these little structures into your roof. So I think those are some really interesting ways that you could increase biodiversity even right in your own backyard. But just in general, to increase biodiversity in a habitat, I think the biggest thing is just to limit the human interaction and the human presence in that habitat, or just to at least make sure that the interaction is mindful of all the species that's there. Okay, and for question number 4, if you cut down the variety in a piece of forest you owned and replanted with one type of tree, what will happen to much of the wildlife that was adapted to the forest? For this, I think unfortunately much of the wildlife would die out, because already, as was stated in the question, these animals can't just relocate to somewhere else. Some of them may be able to, but if there's another habitat that's well fitted for them somewhere close by, chances are it's already going to be full of other species, and there won't be enough room for all of these animals to move there. Some species would probably be able to adapt to this new environment, like for example, whatever species already call those trees home. They would probably do well there, but much of the biodiversity would be lost. And I think even if the species that it is well fit for this new environment, they would still suffer because, as we learned in our textbook, the ecosystem is a really delicate and really intricately connected system. So even the loss of one species in a habitat, it's going to have effects on everything else because all of the species are somehow connected. So anything that impacts one of them will have an impact on another species, whether it be negative or positive. Okay, let's see. Question number 5. Do you think the fate you described for number 4 will be the fate for all of the wildlife in that habitat? I said yes. It's hard to know exactly how removing a species will affect the entire ecosystem, but there will be consequences, both positive and negative, for different species. While all the wildlife will not disappear, at least I don't think it will, there will be far-reaching and unforeseen effects. Removing one species could create a chain reaction to the detriment of the other wildlife in that habitat. So I think, unfortunately, yes, if you went in and removed the biodiversity or removed a lot of plants and planted only one type of tree in a habitat, much of the wildlife would suffer and unfortunately probably die out if they weren't able to find another suitable habitat.